Hello and welcome back to AGTP Daily, where we cover the most important, the most significant tech stories in the US and abroad. Today is Tuesday, the 17th of March, 2026. Let's get right to it. I want to cover three things today. One is the MacBook, Apple's MacBook versus Samsung Galaxy Book in 2026. I also want to do a little bit of AMA. We're going to start small today. I want to comment on something that I was reading, actually, a really interesting post on LinkedIn. It was made by a gentleman named Patel, who's the head of enterprise AI governance at AstraZeneca. And I just want to kind of go through his post and then give you my opinion on this. And frankly, we'd love to do a lot more AMA. So if you have any things you want to ask me, you can post it on LinkedIn, you can post it on Twitter, on X, or you can make a comment on one of our YouTube videos. We'd love to have that as well. So we'll get to that too. And then finally, we will also be joined by Aimei Wei, founder CTO at Stellar Cyber, to explore autonomous threat detection and security tool consolidation in more depth. There's always a lot going on. Let's get right to it. So this is an interesting thing going on actually in the budget laptop wars. These wars are heating up again, and here we go. It's Apple versus Samsung, okay? And I want to talk about a competition in that space that looks at first glance that's something that's smaller than all the stuff we normally talk about in the AI arms race, smaller than NVIDIA, smaller than the fight over massive AI data centers. But to be fair, the more you think about it, the more you dig into it. I mean, even though it feels just like Apple versus Samsung again on another surface, this feels a little bit different to me. Because sometimes the most important tech story is not about the most expensive device. It's not about the biggest investment. It's not about the largest CapEx. It's about the moment where premium brands, and Apple's definitely a premium brand, and so is Samsung, decide they have to come down market a little bit. We'll get to why that's interesting in a bit, and because that's exactly what's happening right now in personal computing. For anybody who's been following Apple for any amount of time at all, it should surprise you that Apple has launched the MacBook Neo, a great-looking new product, by the way, at a $599 price point. That's with the screen, right? Sure, they have a Mac Mini. That's super cheap, but no screen, no keyboard, no mouse, no nothing. Everything else that you want to do, you have to attach to it. And remember, that $599 price for the MacBook Neo is $499 with student pricing because they give a pretty good discount for that as well. This is a direct attempt by Apple for the first time ever, in a way, to compete with Chromebooks and actually lower-end Windows laptops. And to be fair, I don't spend a lot of time looking at these markets, but this just jumped out at me so much, right? Windows laptops, sure, but Chromebooks, people still using them? Here's another thing that's interesting about this. This is not using one of Apple's M chips. It's using one of their A chips, the A18 Pro chip. It starts with 8 gigabytes of memory, not a super high-powered machine, and it already went on sale on March 11th. At the same time, and we already talked about this a couple of days ago, Apple refreshed its higher-end MacBook Air, MacBook Pro lines with the M5 chips. These are their premium products. These are amazing builds, okay? But what's interesting, actually, is what's going on at the MacBook Neo level. On the other side, Samsung is still pushing its Galaxy device ecosystem forward, including its phones, the Galaxy Book laptop line, and at the high end of its hardware implementation and experimentation, the Galaxy Z Trifold. So this is their foldable phone, right? But reports this week are suggesting that Samsung may already be winding down sales of that trifold after only a few months. Think about that. Which says something really important about where the market really is right now. Consumers may admire, they may love futuristic hardware. Like, what's the next thing that's coming? I know plenty of people that bought a foldable phone. They looked at it and it felt super cool. They could kind of sit it on the desk and look at it. Maybe they can do some FaceTime phone type stuff. But the bottom line is that admiring these phones and kind of testing them out is not the same thing as volume demand. And I'm not a big believer that these kind of gimmicky style phones, as expensive as they can be, are going to be mass market products. So the real story here, as I've been getting to, is not like MacBook versus Samsung per se. Okay? That's the top line headline. It's a way to get somebody's attention. But the real story here is, in 2026, the laptop war is being reshaped by price pressure, component shortages, and a growing realization that the next great consumer hardware fight may not be over who has the flashiest premium product, right? Like the iPhone 18 Pro Max or whatever it is, right? Or even the highest end M5 Pro Max chip, whatever that is. But it's more likely going to be over who can deliver the most credible computing experience at the lowest psychologically acceptable price. I'm just about at a point where I need to buy my daughter like a brand new MacBook. Is it a MacBook Pro? Is it a MacBook Neo? What is it going to be? But these are big decisions that need to get made. And that makes this a much more interesting story. Because, again, if you've been following Apple for any amount of time, literally like even just 5 years, Apple has completely ignored historically this part of the market. For years, Apple pitch was completely clear. You want a Mac? You pay for a Mac. And the non or the anti-Mac, what would you call that? Reverse fans? I don't know. They're not really enemies, but like anti-Mac reverse fans here were always like, that's way too expensive. It's not customizable enough. This is how they were like taking a piss out of the Mac, right? There were some variations around what you could do, of course, but the company was never trying to win this kind of sub $700 laptop category in a serious way. The MacBook Air kind of came the closest, but for them, that was like getting to around $1,000 price point. It wasn't about getting to like 700 and think. You're thinking like 1,700, not a big deal. It's 30% cheaper. And in this case, it's 40% cheaper, almost 50% cheaper from what their MacBook Air target price is. And this MacBook Neo, if you buy with a student discount, $499, right, at its base configuration. For years, for the longest period of time, that territory belonged to Chromebooks, budget Windows machines, education PCs, and a long list of devices that often sold on a lot of compromises. And this is one of the reasons why I would never buy it. I would rather like give up a meal for a week and have a MacBook Pro than have a Chromebook. Okay, but the Neo changes that. I mean, and part of the reason why is I just like the Mac operating system. It's just more elegant to me. Everybody, your mileage may vary. Everybody has their preferences. So this MacBook Neo was released, and Reuters described it as one of Apple's most aggressive entries into the low-cost PC market, specifically targeting Chromebooks and lower-end Windows PCs. And that matters. That matters. Because it suggests Apple no longer thinks the budget segment is beneath the brand. Right? And think about it, all brands do this, right? It's saying that Apple thinks the budget segment is strategically necessary. Now, why would Apple do that? We'll get at Apple in a second, but if you think about it, car companies do this all the time, right? You can get a Porsche Cayenne, very expensive SUV, or you can get or you can get the Porsche Macan. I'm not saying the Macan's cheap, but I am saying it's a kind of an entry-level SUV version for somebody who really wants a Porsche but can't afford the Cayenne. It's the same thing if you want a 911 or you want a Cayman. Okay? BMW does the same thing. You want an X5 or you want an X1. Some people just want to have the brand and want to get the benefits of having this beautiful, really well-respected sort of prestige brand, but they can't afford to pay the high end. And it doesn't make any sense for them to either. This is the same thing I think that Apple's trying to accomplish in the laptop market. And partly because the global PC market is under real pressure right now. Reuters reported in January that IDC expected the PC market to shrink. It's weird in my lifetime, right? At least 4.9% in 2026, after a little bit of growth in 2025, as rising component costs and memory price volatility weigh on consumer electronics demand. HP also warned in late February that memory chip volatility would continue to weigh on the PC market. And that context, having that context and understanding that context is really, really important. It's not just Apple, but these other brands, whether it's HP or some of the other existing Windows brands, have always made very cheap, what I would call, and what I've said earlier, were like compromised laptops. Not a lot of memory, not a lot of storage, not a lot of connectivity, so not a lot of ports that are available. And Apple's just never been down there because they didn't want to denigrate the brand. But now what they're thinking is they're not denigrating the brand at all. They're giving you a really cool machine with some of their own cool silicon, right? The 18 Pro, I think, is what they're putting in this machine. And 8 gigabytes of memory. And if you think about it, like I never upgrade memory on my phone. And if I had an A18 chip in my phone, it would be plenty powerful enough to run iOS. And iOS runs at some basic level on the same core as macOS. Right? That was one of the big announcements that Steve Jobs made back in 2017. It's running on some, and this is in the old days, right, version of the Unix core of macOS. So this is not Apple launching like a super cheap laptop into a happy, gigantic, booming market. This is Apple launching a cheap laptop into a market where cost structures are getting worse, consumer sensitivity is getting sharper, much sharper, and a lot of traditional PC makers are being squeezed between falling unit demand and rising component bills. We've talked about this a lot. The more their AI data centers are going to be built, even though they're not the same exact chips, all of the similar components go into building these chips. And as demand kind of just explodes, and as we see gigantic capex in the AI space, right? We don't have to go back and talk about the $110 billion investment into OpenAI by SoftBank, Amazon, and NVIDIA, and then another investment into into Anthropic for $30 billion. As we always say, right, this is nation state style investing. But in that kind of environment where where there are price pressures across the board, whether it's on the demand side for the laptops is falling, or the demand for the components for other reasons, not from a consumer demand perspective, is rising inside of that kind of environment, a company like Apple that can compress performance, battery life, and industrial design into a lower price point has an enormous strategic advantage. It sounds like something Apple can do. Remember, I've said before on this show that it feels to me at some level that Apple has kind of lost its ability to create great new software. The existing software they have is amazing. So building on top of iOS, building on top of iPad OS, building on Mac OS, all these things they do super well. But building like new AI technology and AI software, I think it's just going to be hard for them. But on the hardware side, honestly, I don't think anybody does this better. I just don't think so. And because unlike many Windows laptop vendors, Apple controls the entire thing, right? The silicon, the operating system, the industrial design, and a large part of this supply chain logic. The MacBook Neo runs on an A18 Pro chip, originally associated with the iPhone line. And in plain English, Apple is reusing its own chip architecture, slightly older, and scale advantages to move downward in price without giving up the coherence, right? Or the sort of the way that product works together in a way that feels pretty seamless. And in some senses, this is a completely Apple move, right? This feels like something that Apple would do. It's not trying to become Acer, and nothing against Acer. It's not trying to become Asus, but now you get the sense for like where that product could compete. And if you look at the products that come out of those companies, they're great, they work, that's perfectly fine, particularly if you like a cheap Windows laptop. But Apple feels like it's reached a point finally in its entire architecture and its entire supply chain, again, because they control the whole thing, where they can compete against these with a much better machine. Apple is not trying to flood the market with dozens of confusing configurations, but it never has, right? In the old days, you could walk into an Apple store, whether it was in Tokyo or in New York, and there were like 5 products on the table. It just made life so much easier. Do I want this one, this one, this one, this one, or this one? Nice and easy. I mean, I haven't checked in a while, but I remember when I used to go onto Dell's website, and it was just impossible to figure out like which product was which and which product was best for me. No idea. And they can attach any amount of AI they want to it, but like, come on, get a name that works. get a price line or a configuration machine that actually makes sense. All Apple's doing here is it's saying, here is one lower price Mac. Still recognizably premium. It's going to look great. It's going to feel great. The build is going to be good, right? It's still made of aluminum. It's still going to give you the entire Apple experience. It's still going to connect to your phone. It's still going to connect to your watch. It's still going to connect to your iPad. It's still going to do all the things that an Apple product can do. But now it's actually close enough in price to force the entire Windows ecosystem to pay attention. Believe me, whether it's the Chromebook makers or these cheap Windows laptop makers, they did not want Apple to do this. For years, they've been moaning about how expensive Apple's prices are. But in a quiet moment, they would always tell you, we're happy about that because it leaves an umbrella over our price products, and we'd prefer to have them not be in this market. Reuters is now saying that this is the first time since 2006, that's almost 20 years ago, that Apple has released a comparably low-priced MacBook, right? Because what they did in the old days was they would have this really cheap MacBook entry-level machine, but then if you kind of spec'd it up a little bit, it just got too expensive. So they kind of not tricked you, but they kind of enticed you to come into the Apple ecosystem by making the original price, the sort of base configuration price, look kind of cheap. But if you really wanted it to be useful and have the full Apple experience, you had to upgrade the memory, you had to upgrade the storage, and in some cases, maybe even upgrade the screen. That alone tells you how unusual this moment is. And the reaction to the market has actually been pretty telling. Reuters also reported that iFixit called the MacBook Neo Apple's most repairable laptop in more than a decade. If you don't know what iFixit is, they're like this operation on the side. It's in the name, right? Because a lot of the times, if you buy an Apple laptop or frankly any other laptop, you don't know how to fix it yourself. And Apple doesn't really want you rooting around inside their machines. So you could send it to iFixit and they'll do it for you, no matter which machine you have, because these guys and gals are professionals at doing that. But what they've been complaining about for years with Apple is like, oh God, why did you build this machine where like the memory is soldered onto the board and like it's impossible for us to fix that or change that? And even from an environmental standpoint, Apple was taking flack for this. But in this case, iFixit says that the MacBook Neo is the most repairable laptop in more than a decade. That's important because repairability, as I was saying, it's not just about sustainability. This is like a school procurement story as well, a fleet management story, and a total cost of ownership story. Budget buyers don't just care what a machine costs on day one. They care what it costs to keep alive. And this is what I was talking about before. Do you need to upgrade it? Do you need to change this? Do you need to add peripherals? Can you plug in peripherals to it? Right. And to be clear, the Neo is not some magic laptop that destroys physics. It starts with 8 gigabytes of memory. Memory soldered on, which limits future upgrades, right? We talked about that. This is one of the things that Apple does that iFixit hates, right? And even iFixit's praise came with some caveats, including a modest 6 out of 10 on repairability score, concerns about upgrade constraints as local AI workloads become more demanding, right? You're going to need more powerful chips. And sometimes when the chip itself, when the GPU or the CPU and the existing memory, in this case, the 8 gigabytes of memory is not powerful enough to run it, it'll swap memory off on the disk. I don't know if you know how that works, but it's just another place that it goes to actually use memory. So this is not a victory lap for like low cost perfection. But I don't think that was Apple's aim either, right? It's just a recognition that Apple has found a way to make good enough, just like the BMW X1 or the Porsche Cayman, which is not the 911 that everybody really wants, but they're both good enough. They're great products, actually, in the same way that the MacBook Neo is a great product. And it feels aspirational. I want to be part of the Apple ecosystem. Maybe I got an Apple Watch for a Christmas present or for a birthday present, but I want to connect it to something. Maybe I've never been able to afford like even the regular iPhone. It's just too expensive. But now maybe I can. Now maybe I feel like I can join and be part of that ecosystem. And as I said, this is something that its competition has not wanted it to do, as much as they have complained over the years about, oh, Apple's way too expensive. Okay, so let's be very clear about this. Historically, Windows vendors won at the low end by offering choice, way too much choice in my mind, right? Price flexibility and compatibility. Apple won at the premium end easily by offering like just a better design, good enough or great battery life. This thing of ecosystem integration that I was talking about, it works with your phone, it works with your watch, it'll work with your Ring if Apple does a Ring, it'll work with everything that Apple builds, and that's on purpose. And also this idea that people just trust the Apple brand. I know that I do. When I go in and I buy an Apple laptop, I'm not thinking about what am I going to do if this thing breaks or if it's a lemon or it doesn't work. I just expect it to work. And to be fair, I had one problem years ago with one of the Apple screens, but they would fix it for free. Literally for free, no matter where I was in the world. And I was in Bangkok. Simple to do. Not a problem at all. But it's the only time I've ever had an Apple product in the 20-something years that I've been buying Apple products that even had the smallest problem. Okay? And once Apple steps meaningfully downward in price, the middle of the market becomes unstable. And Samsung, whose laptops I've not used, right? But I have used their phones. Samsung makes really great high-level premium products. But Samsung's is a very interesting case study in the instability, sort of in that mid part of the laptop market. Their Galaxy Book line is real, substantial, and in many ways technically impressive. Samsung is a very impressive technology company. They're not just mucking around. Like in the old days, no denigration to Sony, but like in the old days, Sony used to make this Vaio line of laptops. They were good, but like they weren't really focused on it. But what Samsung's doing is completely different. Okay. And there was a fear back then when the Sony Vaios came out. Oh no, Sony's going to take over another one of these markets. But Samsung has consistently been trying to improve its laptop products. And again, they're very, very impressive according to all the stuff I read. I've not used them, but I have read about them a lot because this is a market that interests me quite a bit. The company's latest lineup spans mainstream notebooks up through expensive creator-oriented machines like the Galaxy Book 6 Ultra, which can get to around $3,000 depending on its configuration. And I think my most recent, is that true? Yeah, I think my most recent MacBook Pro cost me over $3,000. So it's competing in the same space, at least at the Book 6 Ultra level, right? And Samsung is also, just like every other maker of sort of premium high-level PC laptops, AI-powered productivity, premium displays. Remember, Samsung probably makes most of these displays as well, right? Because they are also a very highly integrated technology company. And ecosystem integration across its device family. Remember, if Apple makes a watch, Samsung makes a watch. If Apple makes a little tracking device, Samsung's going to make one too. If Apple's making a laptop, Samsung's making a laptop. Okay, I'm surprised they don't have their own version of Vision Pro. They're probably working on it, but maybe they just haven't released it yet. And this is exactly where the contrast with Apple becomes kind of interesting to me. Samsung's brand is stretched across many categories, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that Samsung makes that Apple wouldn't even dabble in. Phones, foldables, TVs, appliances, memory, displays. They make a ton of stuff. There's no way Apple's making a refrigerator, right? But Samsung makes refrigerators. They make washing machines. Apple doesn't make a TV per se. They make screens and monitors. You'd be surprised to find out where they get those panels from. But the fact that Samsung has such a breadth of products is a strength for them, for sure. But it can also make their computing proposition feel a little bit fragmented, right? Because it's not the only thing they do. Like I said, Apple's not making refrigerators. If they came out with a fridge, you would just be like, what are we doing here? Right? But Samsung can do that because they've been in that business for decades. Right? This is the origin of their business. Apple sells a much more coherent story, and Samsung is often competing with them more on a portfolio perspective. And in a premium market, portfolios can work beautifully, but in a budget war, clarity means so much more, right? If a student, a parent, or a school administrator asks a simple question, what is the safest, and this is the point, right? What is the safest, cleanest, best value laptop I can buy for just basic work, writing papers, doing some simple AI stuff, right? Doing whatever a student would do, even taking notes. Apple now has a surprisingly direct answer. Just buy the MacBook Neo. Just buy it. Okay, even with the compromises that it has, just buy it. But the response from Samsung and frankly other budget laptop makers is going to be much harder. Look, I once had this conversation with a gentleman who was the head of product at one of the biggest, and I won't say the name of them, but one of the biggest e-commerce providers in Southeast Asia. And I said to him, like, you have a discoverability problem on your website. It's hard to find the products. And he goes, how can that be possible? We have 2 million products on our website. And I was like, that's the problem. You have way too many products. And finding the one that I want amidst all the ones that I don't want is almost impossible. And Samsung, by contrast to Apple, has stronger arguments higher up the stack. Better OLED displays in many models, touch and 2-in-1 flexibility, deep Windows compatibility, often more RAM at similar or slightly higher prices, better alignment with the broader enterprise and productivity software world. But those are comparative arguments. Apple's move is emotionally much simpler and always has been in their product line. A real Mac for $600. I mean, if you're a student, for almost $500. It's just so much easier to decide. Again, go back to this concept that I told you about. You can walk into the Apple store in Ginza, and on the first floor, it's crowded there. But you can walk in there, and there's like just one table just with all the Macs on it. It's not that hard to figure out. And to be fair, there's one table just with all the watches on it. Again, not that hard to figure out. And another table with all the phones, and then one with the iPads. Really simple to figure out like which Apple product you want. And that is where this trifold, which we mentioned at the beginning of this segment, from Samsung becomes kind of symbolically useful, right? Like, why does it matter? Why did we mention it? Well, the reported collapse of Samsung's Galaxy trifold, doesn't directly determine the fate of their Galaxy books. But it's got to be related, right? Because they're completely different product categories. But strategically, it illustrates a broader truth about the 2026 consumer hardware market, right? And I know somebody, I don't know if they had the Z Fold, but they definitely had a Samsung Fold phone. Right. But the point here is that in the current hardware market, innovation theater is not enough. Look at how much better our product is. Look at the thing that it can do. Nobody else can fold this and it doesn't have a crease, or whatever the point is that you're trying to make. Premium experimentation is not enough. The market overall, and again, globally, is punishing devices that are exciting in concept, but difficult to scale into mainstream buying behavior. And to be fair, look, Apple's thinking about coming up with a foldable phone too. There have been plenty of rumors about this. I don't think anybody's going to buy it. I don't. I honestly don't think anybody's going to buy it. Not enough people to make it scale. I definitely don't need one. I don't want one. I want a new phone. I'm probably going to buy a new phone at the end of this year, but I'm not buying a foldable phone. I already have an iPad. Why do I need a phone that folds? It's just going to make it bigger, bulkier, heavier. Who needs this? What do I have? The 15 Pro Max? I do. I bought it a few years ago. I love this phone. It's probably my favorite phone ever. And I'll probably just go out and buy the iPhone 18 Pro Max as well. It's just the right size. I can find the right case for it. It does everything I need it to do. And there are no gimmicks. It doesn't fold. You know what I mean? It doesn't flash. It doesn't beep. It doesn't do anything silly. So while some people think that the future may be foldable, flexible, and multi-screen, what's going on in the market right now is brutally cost-conscious. Again, I'm not suggesting that the iPhone 18 Pro Max is going to be cost-conscious. It's going to be a cost-conscious purchase, but I don't need a foldable phone at all. And the point here is that matters for laptops because the industry is entering a strange inversion. I mean, you could see this coming for a while, but it's actually happening now. For the past couple of years, the big narrative in PCs was AI PCs. It was AI everything. I'm surprised they don't make AI donuts. Like, go down to Krispy Kreme and get an AI donut. That wouldn't surprise me either. AI PCs, neural processing units, Copilot branding, and on-device intelligence, something obviously very important to Apple. And all of that still really matters. And Samsung is leaning into that heavily with the Galaxy Book family as well. Apple is also leaning into local AI. We've spent a lot of time talking about that. They're being much more quiet about this and much more tightly integrated into its own software stack. But underneath the AI marketing layer is a much more practical economic story. Oh, God, I hate to say this, but the supply chain is just getting uglier. I live really close to the supply chain where Apple is sourcing all of its products. Same thing for Samsung as well, right? Because I live right in the center of Southeast Asia. So uniquely positioned to understand what's happening in the supply chain here. Reuters reported this week that SK Group Chairman Che Tae-wan expects chip wafer shortages tied to AI demand to last until 2030. Again, you're seeing this confluence of events where big chip makers like NVIDIA that are selling sort of industrial-style artificially intelligence-enabled chips to some of its biggest users like OpenAI, Anthropic, Perplexity, and even Apple, right? Everybody wants these NVIDIA GPUs. But on the mid to lower end, they're also becoming constraints because you need those mid to lower end chips to run the other parts of your data center that aren't running the AI sides of it too. And earlier Reuters reporting also noted that surging memory prices are kind of mucking with the outlook for consumer electronic makers, and that PC demand, as I mentioned earlier, is still expected to contract this year. That means that manufacturers are facing an uncomfortable equation. The parts that matter to PCs, the memory, the storage, the compute, are under pressure because AI data centers and hyperscale demand are distorting the economics of the entire semiconductor ecosystem, right? Like I mentioned, they're buying these really powerful high-end NVIDIA chips or chips from other makers that are making these very high-end AI chips. But just to run the nuts and bolts of their data centers as well, just to run the servers, to turn them on, they need regular chips too, right? So the laptop makers either raise prices, accept lower margins, or rethink the product. And Apple's answer to this, as we hinted at earlier, appears to be redesign the product around your own silicon and go get the entry market. But that's why they're using the A18 Pro chip. Nobody else in the world uses it. Nobody else in the world designed it. Apple doesn't manufacture it, but they contract out the manufacturing. My guess would be to TSMC. But the point is that there's no competition in the demand space for that A18 Pro chip, and that's really smart. And to be fair, there's no other competition for Apple's M series of chips either. They can roll out as many of those M5s as they want. They're more expensive. They're not going to put those into a MacBook Neo. But the A18 Pro chip is perfectly powerful enough to run the MacBook Neo. Because if you cannot rely on the whole industry to produce abundant cheap components, the next best thing is to own more of the stack yourself. And this is something that Apple's been doing really forever. And particularly in the Tim Cook era, Again, go back and look at your history. But one of the reasons why Tim Cook was hired when Steve Jobs was still alive and still the CEO and still basically running the company on a day-to-day basis, was that Tim Cook would just nail the supply chain in Compaq. Just nailed it. And that was something that Apple was bad at and something that Steve Jobs wanted to disintermediate. Tim Cook has been amazing at that. And their demand forecasting is second to none. But for Samsung, it's way more complicated because it's both a device maker and a major component player. While it feels like that may give them this sort of integration strength, it doesn't automatically solve the retail challenge. A consumer does not buy a vertical integration in the abstract. They buy a laptop they understand. And again, this gets back to this idea of how many products are there on the table at the Samsung store. I mean, Sony, again, there was a Sony store in Ginza too. But you ran into the same problem. You walked in and there were like 50 laptops. Way too many configurations. And Apple's message, as always, is becoming easier to understand than it used to be. And there's also a cultural angle here. For years, recommending a Mac to a budget-conscious buyer required caveats. Yeah, it's expensive, but maybe it lasts longer. Or, yeah, the upfront cost is higher, but the resale value. Like all these little things you would have to say to somebody who didn't want to be part of the Apple ecosystem because they thought just the entry point was too expensive. But now it's just easier. The MacBook Neo is cheap enough, and I'm not shilling for any particular product, right? Apple doesn't sponsor this video. But the point is like what they're doing and why they're going down in the market and why they've finally been able to do this in a way that makes a really good product at a price that makes sense. It changes everything, right? It changes campus buying. It changes family buying. I told you, it may change what I buy for my family. It changes the psychology of the first-time laptop ownership from like, why is this so expensive to, hey, I can afford this. And it fits into my ecosystem as well. And once Apple gets the first laptop sale, it's not just selling a device. It's selling a future upgrade path into the broader ecosystem. iPhone, iCloud, AirPods, which I forgot to mention earlier, services, and maybe eventually even a higher-end Mac. And this is why the Neo matters more than its spec sheet. And remember, if you're a lover of BMW and you buy a BMW X1, if you get a better job or get a raise or win the lottery or your Bitcoin goes up in price, you may get an X3. That's why they make the X1. You may get an X5. You may get just a better BMW. Maybe you'll get a 5 Series. Maybe you'll get a 7 Series Li. You don't know. But that's the point that they're trying to make is like, just become part of the BMW ecosystem. Just become part of the Porsche ecosystem. And hopefully over time, as you get older or more successful or earn more money, you're not going to go buy a Cadillac. You're going to go buy a 911, right? Or buy a Cayenne if you're in the Porsche ecosystem. So where does this leave Samsung, though? Right? Because what Apple's doing with the Neo is it's creating an on-ramp into the Apple ecosystem. And that makes perfect sense to me. In the old days, I guess that would have been like the iPhone SE. God, I really want an iPhone, but I can't afford the normal one. I'll get an SE. I actually had one. It was a perfectly good device. Samsung's a big, well-integrated company and filled with very smart, hardworking, very creative people. They're not out of this fight. They may be better positioned for buyers who want Windows flexibility and more traditional multitasking expectations, just everything that comes with Windows. Samsung's ecosystem, especially for Android, right, because all the phones they make are Android, remains very meaningful. I mean, Samsung probably sells more phones. I don't know this off the top of my head, but it was mostly always true that Samsung was selling more Android phones than all the other Android phones combined. Right, Galaxy phones, tablets, earbuds, and laptops can still offer a very compelling multi-device experience, again, because what they do is they're kind of, I don't want to say copying, but let's say they're mimicking Apple's ecosystem in this sense. Like if Apple comes out with AirPods Pro, Samsung comes out with them. If Apple comes up with a watch, Samsung will upgrade its watch stuff. But it now has kind of a branding problem at the low end that Apple has partially escaped. At the same moment, Apple has entered the segment more forcefully. And again, Apple's brand is very different than Samsung's brand because it's never had kind of low-end goods. Never. It's never had low-end products. So when people think about Apple, they think about premium. When people think about a Samsung brand, they think about the entire scope of their ecosystem and of their product line. Some of those products can be really expensive. But some of those products can also be like a washing machine. Apple doesn't make washing machines. So when they come out with the MacBook Neo, it doesn't have to compete for brand identity with a washing machine or, a refrigerator. And don't get me wrong, Samsung makes great refrigerators. I've had one. They're really good. But Apple's move into this low-cost part of the market feels way more disruptive than it would if Samsung did this, because it violates your expectations. You're thinking, I didn't think Apple was going to make a product like this at all. And people have been giving them flack for it, again, for decades. They finally figured out a way to do this in a way that makes sense, again, because they make their own silicon. This is not a hard story to tell. And if you're somebody who's wanted to be in the Apple ecosystem for a long time, this is kind of the perfect way to do it. Samsung's innovation, by contrast, can sometimes feel additive rather than disruptive. More features, more categories, right? More experiments, more form factors. I don't know, at some point it can feel exciting. Maybe if you're inside Samsung, every time you come out with a new iteration of a product, it feels exciting to you. But the bottom line is, when budgets get tighter on the consumer side, but also on the internal Samsung side, right? You have two things coming together. Buyers just move to the easiest story to understand. Like, okay, the MacBook Neo, it's the cheapest Mac Pro, it's the cheapest Mac laptop. I understand what's going on there. I understand the ecosystem. But when Samsung starts coming out with lower priced products, you're like, I don't know which one I'm supposed to get. There are too many of them. There are too many choices. And that is why I think the phrase budget laptop war is actually right. Even if the story is more subtle than the headline, this is not a war where the cheapest machine wins. It's a war where the company that best redefines value wins, and this is what Apple's been doing forever. Apple is trying to define value downward without losing prestige, and the prestige part of Apple is never going to go away. Right? They're not going to make some plastically poorly constructed keyboard laptop with a terrible screen and a terrible hinge. They're just not going to do that, right? Samsung is trying to defend value upward through premium features, AI messaging, and ecosystem breadth. Both of these strategies are rational in a way, but in 2026, with memory prices rising, PC demand weakening, and consumer patience wearing thin, I suspect the market is going to reward the simpler proposition, and this has always been Apple's proposition. And right now, as I said, the simplest proposition is Apple's. Okay, we are going to now make some comments on Oliver Patel. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Look, we mentioned at the beginning of this show today that we want to do an AMA, and we've been mentioning this actually for the last week. This isn't strictly like an Ask Me Anything, but there is something out there. Oliver Patel, who's the head of enterprise and AI governance at AstraZeneca, a few days ago published something on LinkedIn. I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn, and I kind of want to just comment on it and show you his post right here. And he makes a really good point, but I want to comment on it from my perspective and to just give a little bit of a viewpoint on this, because I think he's saying something really important. I want to read a bit of it to you. In 2026, too many people still use AI like it's a chatbot. He's 100% right. Using AI to meaningfully augment and transform your work requires heavy lifting up front. You got to do the work. You've got to figure it out. And just like everything else in life, he says, the more you put in, the more you'll get out of it. And I want to get to this because I think this is the most important point he's trying to make, and I want to make a point on my side as well. Simply using ChatGPT or Claude or any other implementation of these AI chatbots or these AI ecosystems to answer queries, search for information, or automate simple tasks is not going to put you ahead in your career. I think this is the point he's trying to make. Okay, let's read just a little bit more. However, by using AI in an informed, intentional, and active way, you will get a lot more out of it than those who treat it solely as a machine that can instantly answer any question or write an email. Okay, look, we can have Oliver on the show later if he wants to come on, but here's the point that I want to make about this, because I think he's making a really important point. When a big technology transformation change comes along, you can't just use it for its most basic functionality, particularly if you want to use it to help your career. So there's a lot of talk out there right now about how AI is going to replace humans, and I think there's a lot of fear in the employment market, particularly based on some of the stories that we've seen. I mean, I think we spent some time yesterday, the day before, talking about how Facebook is potentially planning to lay off, like Meta is planning to lay off potentially, no decision has been made yet, 20% of its staff. That's a big deal. And again, if it's a proxy for the rest of the stuff that's happening in the technology space, that's bad for all tech workers, right? And we can spend hours talking about what's going on in the SaaS space and what we think is going to happen there. Watch the episode we did on ATP Insights with Dr. Joshua Kettleman, who's the CTO at Staple. He and I spent a lot of time talking about what that's going to look like. And also we spent some time talking with Dan Tersis, right, from Blue Prism, about the fact that workers are not necessarily going to get fired, but they're just going to do different things. But I think the point that Oliver's trying to make here, and I think the point that's really important actually, is it's incumbent upon you to learn how to use the newest, the shiniest tools in a way that maybe the people that are sitting around you are just afraid to engage in. They're like, I'm just going to use the chatbot because it's better than search. You know, this is the thing you were hearing kind of at the end of 2025 is more and more and more people were using products like Anthropic and like OpenAI. Like, you know what? I don't go to Google anymore, which is weird because Google has just made their search powered by Gemini. So like whether you go to Google, whether you go to Anthropic, or whether you go to OpenAI, you're using AI-enabled search at some level. You can make an argument about which interface you like better than the other. But the point I think that Oliver Patel is making here is that it's incumbent upon you to learn about how to use these new tools in a way to superpower yourself so that you don't get left behind, right? And again, if you think about it, let's go back into history and make an analogy here. If you were a guy riding a horse and buggy, and that was the way, and that was the taxi service that you were providing in like a big city, whether it was New York, Chicago, or wherever, or in Baltimore, right? And cars came along, you were going to have to learn how to drive a car. And you were going to have to figure out how to like save up enough money if you still wanted to do your taxi or your delivery business. You were going to have to learn how to drive a car. And I don't think this is that much different. Right? Again, if in the old days, if you ran like a laundry shop, you'd have to learn like how to use a washing machine as opposed to just washing everything on a board by hand. This is a much bigger transformation, maybe the most important things that humans have invented up until now. But I think Oliver's point is actually really good in the sense that if you're just using the tool at its simplest level, you're going to get left behind. And your peers, the ones who are actually digging in, and like he says, just like everything else in life, the more you put in, the more you get out. The ones that are doing the hard work, that are figuring out how to automate processes, that are figuring out how to use the tools, that are using OpenClaw, going, it's not easy to do, right? Get your own dedicated PC, get your own dedicated Mac Mini to figure out how all these tools are working. I think his point is that from a career perspective, it's going to create some safety for you in a way that maybe other people won't have, because they're just too nervous to try to figure out, or maybe just not even qualified to figure out how to use these new tools. And to be fair, I saw this, okay? Because, and I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it because I think it's a really good example. When I was still working in the financial services industry, whether it was at Goldman Sachs or at Citigroup or wherever I ended my career, the point was that when we were there, a lot of technology was coming in that was impacting our jobs. And it was very, very obvious that the people that understood how to use that technology to re-empower themselves to do more work, be more productive, and be more profitable were the ones that were going to remain. And to be fair, I spent a ton of time, particularly when I was at Goldman Sachs, redesigning trading systems, working with the algorithmic trading team to try to figure out how to make these products internally so useful for us we could literally like do 2, 3, 4, 5 times more business, lower our own prices internally, and still make way more money by trading. But also the tools that we built also made the prop trading that we did, way better as well. So the confluence of all those events, understanding how trading works, understanding what these new tools were, understanding how to automate using algorithmic trading, understanding the new technologies that we were using and implementing, I essentially at some point automated myself out of a job. But while doing that, learned so much about how this technology worked and how the new tech that we were using changed the way we did business at scale, which means that every time I see new technology come out, I am no longer the guy who's afraid of this is going to put me out of a job per se, because at some point in the interim, you're going to have to figure out how to use these tools. And the guys and gals that do figure out how to use the tools are the ones that are going to thrive, that are going to thrive. It would ends up being a very transformational environment. And the ones who don't, the ones like Oliver says, that don't put in the work are not going to get as much out of it as they possibly can. Okay, that's our AMA comment for today. I'd love to have more people comment on LinkedIn, comment on X, comment on our videos on YouTube. And if you ask some great questions, we'll come up with some great answers and give you our perspective. Okay, we are going to welcome Aimei Wei, the CTO and a founder of Stellar Cyber. We'll be right back. Okay, let's welcome Aimei Wei, founder, CTO at Stellar Cyber, to the show. We wanted Aimei here because we wanted to explore autonomous threat detection and security tool consolidation in more depth. But before we do that, Amy, maybe tell us a little bit about Stellar Cyber, and then let's define what SOC, so Security Operations Center, is so that our viewers can get a better sense of context.
Sure. Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me here. Security Operations Center, what it is, it's basically your defense team that keep the enterprise, keep the organization safe, right? So for example, they're watching your environment 24/7 to identify any suspicious behaviors or attacks going on and stop it before it causes damage. That's the whole mission of the Security Operations Center.
Got it. And does every big enterprise have their own SOC? They don't outsource this to somebody else, but most of them have their own. So like when I was at Goldman Sachs, you're suggesting that Goldman had its own SOC as well, yeah?
It's running as SOC is not cheap and easy, right?
Yeah.
So not every organization have it, but the big organizations, especially cybersecurity is very important to them. Those large financial institutions or healthcare, they definitely have their own SOC. But there are also now more and more service providers that provide the security service for organizations that cannot afford or do not have the expertise or not willing to run their own SOC. So they will be outsourced to the service providers.
I got it. Their own SOC. That's what you call it, right?
Yeah, right.
But so tell me a little bit more about Stellar Cyber as well. And also maybe you can tell the audience like where you're based, because I'm just looking outside over your shoulder, outside the back window. I can see these beautiful trees and the weather looks fabulous there. Tell us first about Stellar Cyber.
Yes, Stellar Cyber is a cybersecurity company. We are based in the Silicon Valley,
nice,
San Jose Bay Area, and then we are almost more than 10 years old.
Okay.
Why I just probably share a little bit.
Please.
Why I started this company.
Yep.
And what problem do we want to solve?
Perfect.
So you see that organizations spend a lot of money, invest a lot of money in tools and people, but you still hear the headline says somebody got breached.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So before I started this company 10 years ago, at that time, it was crazy. Hackers stay in your environment for more than 200 days without being discovered.
Oh my.
It's because like tools are siloed, they're not connected, and we relied on the like rules that may not be able to detect the new or unknown threats, right? So all those issues. Then what we started with, we want to build a unified platform that has full visibility in all your environment, your endpoint, your network, your cloud, and use machine learning. AI at that time is mostly machine learning to detect the suspicious behaviors and then stop it before it causes damage. So enable the SOC people to identify threats earlier and take action so they don't cause damage to the organization. That's our mission where we started. So we built this platform, AI-driven platform, to enable the SOC to stay ahead.
Yeah, look, it sounds fascinating to me. I want to ask you this one thing though. If you started 10 years ago, what's the right way to say this? The available power and throughput and compute back then, 10 years ago, and also the release of like more powerful artificial intelligence tools wasn't there yet, right? So if I look at the landscape today, it feels to me like it's changed massively, even in just the last 3 years. So where are these autonomous security operations headed as these AI capabilities have changed so much from when, we founded this, not we, but when you founded this company 10 years ago and today? Because the technology landscape feels very different to me, yeah? Right.
So I think when we did this 10 years ago, definitely what was available to us about AI is basically machine learning, and the compute and the available technology was limited. But we were still able to build this architecture, this vision that collect all the data, heavy lifting, collect the data, normalize, enrich, and use machine learning to detect. That is still very applicable to today.
For sure.
But human humans still need to do the last mile to investigate the alert, right, the case, and make a decision is if this is true positive or false positive, and take action. Although we can automate a lot of those, but human still is a driving factor. I think the appearance of the Gen AI, agentic AI today is just get our vision realized faster. It's an enabler.
I was going to say, can I interrupt you just for a second? Because I always feel like
Sure.
a visionary technology is always thinking, if I had these types of tools, that's what I would build. But because I don't have them yet, I'm going to build the best thing I possibly can. But at some point, those tools are going to get built. So if we think about building an architecture that allows us to then insert them in, then when it does happen, we can be completely ready. Because I cannot be convinced that you and your team were surprised when agentic AI came out and when generative AI came out, right? This must have been something you were following anyway, yeah?
Right. I think initially we automated so many things, but it still need the security people to operate. And over the years, what we learned in this industry, there's a shortage of the talent. There's just not enough experts who understand the security and can operate SOC. But now with AI agents, that makes it more possible. That's where the autonomous SOC now come from. It's AI agents. They do it, what the SOC analyst does, 24/7. I think for the people, you need the 3 shifts, right, to cover 24/7. And then now with AI agents, it's more possible for us to respond much faster. This is, we must do this. On the other side, cybersecurity is always attack.
Yeah.
Attacker side and the defense side. Yep. The attacker side, they're not stopping. They are also leveraging AI to like scale up their attack. In the past, we probably receive, say, for example, 100 attacks twice a day. Now you probably receive thousands or 10,000, right? So with that scale, if you do not use agentic AI on the defense side, we just cannot keep up.
So it's going to be really hard to keep up. And I can imagine that when the agentic AI and the generative AI stuff came out, that again, teams like yours that work on the cybersecurity side, on the defense side, were really excited about, like, how can we, instead of having 3 human shifts, how can we have this work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or 8 days a week, whatever it is, just it's like always on and always looking. But on the flip side, you're right. The guys and gals on offense were just like, okay, now we have some real killer tools we can use. And at some level, what I've heard is that what they're doing is they're also building, because the outcome for them could be a ton of money, right? And a ton of influence and a ton of power. So they build these massive attack centers.
Right.
And they're constantly updating. So how do you keep up with this? Do you know what I mean? Because they're heavily incentivized to be able to do this, yeah?
I think that's why I don't think we just take a human fully out of the picture. It's our human working together with AI agents.
Right.
So to form a team, and our human will be more focused on the strategic work, more the proactive work. So we are not only reacting like to the attacks. We are also proactively filling the gaps and covering the blind spots, or even deception, lure them in, right?
Yeah.
To somewhere that's not important. So it's a fascinating, but I feel like we are confident that we can still win this war against the adversaries for the cyber security.
So you just did that thing that I told you might do before we started recording. I had not considered this, and frankly, nobody else that I've talked to about this topic has said this to me. This idea of you could trick these offensive AI agents into going into, and I'm just going to use a metaphor, right? But like going into a room where there's nothing there, or it looks like there's interesting stuff or important stuff there, but actually there's nothing there. And then they just hang out in that room. Because again, one of the other things that I've learned, at least I think I've learned, is that no longer are these attackers sitting outside on the periphery of these big enterprise systems. What they try to do is they try to sneak into the system and then see, and they can exist there for a while, right? because they're not sentient, but they're listening and paying attention because they're agentic. And they may wait to strike, like you said, for 2 months or 3 months, so you don't even know they're there. But if you put them into a room where there's nothing important, even though it looks like there's something important, they could just get stuck in the dark for months, no?
Right, yeah. So I think that's we have different strategies to do that. I think so humans still together, different side, the team together with the AI. I think we can still defeat uh, the adversary. Another point is when you think about it, not every back to the previous point, not every organization can run a SOC. Now with a lot of things automated, you can have a lean security team. You don't need an army of people. You can still run a SOC very effectively. This is for the organizations that do not have a like huge SOC team, right? Now make it more possible. This is for the middle layer of organizations.
Yeah.
And then for the even smaller one, even lean security team that don't have it, we built a platform so that service provider can use our platform to provide the services for the smaller organizations or organizations that do not totally that want to outsource their security. And we built the like multi-tenancy architecture from day one. So each tenant information is totally isolated. They have their own model. Even the machine learning model is profiled against that individual client. So how this architecture enable us to protect 99%. I think that was our slogan is we protect the 99%. Because another trend in the threat world, in the past, they target those large organizations like who are financial or healthcare. But these days, they target everyone because tools allow them to easily automate a lot of attacks, so they can afford to target everyone. The vulnerable ones are those smaller ones who actually do not have mature SOC or like security service.
So I think there's and tell me if I have this wrong, but I think there's a misconception out there, right? That, as you said, in the old days, the targeting would be just to the largest institutions, and they would actually be not physically, but they would be targeted. Like, let's go after company A. But today, because the tools are so automated, I think that small and medium-sized companies don't understand that, like, the people that are attacking them don't even know who they are and don't care. They're just looking for a way in anywhere. Right. And
right.
So how do you explain this to people though, right? Because again, I'm sitting here, I run a small company, and I'm thinking like no one's ever going to target me, but they're going to target me along with like Goldman Sachs because they don't care. There's no extra cost to them for doing it. Yeah. How do you convince people of this?
They're just scanning. I think even you read the news, sometimes even individuals got the ransomware attack, right? Yeah. Suddenly your laptop, your machine is locked and blue screen. It's like people say you have to pay me ransom. And the stories like small organizations like a church, community church or library, all those like people usually don't pay much attention because exactly as you said, like tools, they just scan, they just randomly try. And so if you have a port open, right, and the public IP, then they will just get in.
Yeah, they will just get in, and who knows what they'll do once they get in. Can we dig a little bit deeper into this balance you're talking about for these, whether they're lean teams or big SOC teams as well? How do you balance or kind of make this decision around what should be automated and then where a human should be involved, if that makes sense?
Right. Yes, absolutely. I think the part that should be automated are more repetitive manual work, like mundane work that I think more intelligent work can still needed to human to also like human needed to be there. Human are more aware of the context of the nuance that you may not necessarily know. AI may not have access, right? So humans still needed to be there. And another thing is, I think human can also learn from AI because AI have not access a lot of knowledge, right? So you can, it's like for junior, people talk about, oh, are we going to only need a senior analyst? What about the junior ones,
Right.
right? So if we only need a senior analyst, then who, after they retire, what do we do?
Exactly. This gets back
So,
to the talent problem you were talking about before, right? You can't just have some senior person and no junior person,
right,
because when that senior person leaves or even just goes on vacation, someone's going to need to be there to do stuff. Yeah.
right,
Sorry.
right. So that's another, that's why we call it human augmented autonomous SOC.
Yeah.
We human augmentation is in two ways. One way is human help to validate, to feedback, to teach AI the specifics about that organization. But on the other hand, human can learn from the
For
AI
sure.
all the security knowledges. We want to make it transparent why the AI made this decision based on what knowledge, and then junior analysts can quickly learn. Like they learn how to use AI, how to learn from AI, and then they can grow faster, right? So you also want that continuity uh, of supply of a tenant.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I've been having these conversations a lot recently, and one of the things that I like to make an analogy to is when I was sitting on an automated stock trading desk. It was really helpful actually for us to watch all the people that were sort of running the algorithms, and there were tons of different algos that we were running. In a way, it did help us learn how to trade better because we watched what the
Right.
algorithm was doing, and it knew things we didn't know because it knew all the historical trading that we put into the
Right.
machine learning aspect of it. And I guess you're suggesting the same thing is true, and I hadn't considered it. But for the
Yeah.
cybersecurity stuff as well, it's like if there's a junior, even a senior analyst there who says, "Oh, we hadn't considered that, but the agent is now telling me that
Right.
this vulnerability is there, and we didn't understand that before." It's kind of cool, right? If you're learning from the artificial intelligence stuff, yeah.
Right, right. You can also have AI agents research into the latest emerging new attacks, right? IOCs.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's a complementary. It's like you expand your team. We consider AI agents as a virtual team.
Yeah, for sure. And look, here's another really interesting point, and I'm curious if you can comment on this for me as well. I was having a conversation again with a super senior, with another CTO actually, who runs an agentic AI. It's part of their business is agentic AI, and he said people are talking so much right now about like full autonomous agents, and he said let's just slow down for a second and think about this. Do we even have employees, human employees, that are fully autonomous? Do you know what I mean? That like never go to their boss for approval for something or never ask
Exactly.
their colleagues for it. They're just like full. Is that even really a thing? So when you talk about agentic AI and when you think about it internally with yourself and your teams, you're not thinking full autonomy. You're thinking like a lot of autonomy. Yeah.
Right. It's a structure. Even for the AI agent, it's like a human team structure, right?
Yeah.
It has like a supervisors look at the issues and then break it down into smaller ones, give distributed to the team. Each layer will refine it to more specifics, and they coordinate that way. It's exactly like human organization. I truly agree with your point. It's like human organization. You should also have that structure, right?
Right.
Because the top level has that vision, and then each layer down is how to execute, and you have to make sure it's executed, supervised, um, executed properly.
Yeah. So this brings up another point though, right? Are there governance issues that people need to think about that are different once you introduce this agentic AI, this like partial autonomy into the process? Are there governance issues that arise, and maybe some risks that arise as well that hadn't been considered when only humans were doing this?
That definitely, I think that's why you probably heard about the open cloud,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Everybody rushed to it.
Yeah.
It's not hardened. It has so many like vulnerabilities. How
I
can you make
know.
sure your secrets are not
Secure.
like just
No.
yeah, is stored securely, and access is that access each layer is that hardened, is governed, right, controlled. So the autonomous SOC we built with all those security control in place. So it has to be very, very secure, and making sure the boundaries for different customers are well maintained.
Right.
Uh, that's also come with the data architecture we built over the years.
Super.
So because we are multi-tenant, all the tenant data are segregated. So when you apply AI agents, that segregation has to be maintained.
Yeah, for sure.
All the,
Go
yeah.
ahead. I
I just want to make sure.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, you just throw your data to AI agent and it will magically get everything done. It's not like that.
No, not at all. But again, you wouldn't just throw all your data at even like a PhD graduate from MIT in computer science who's just joined the company yesterday. You would never do that either because they wouldn't know what to do with it as well. And I think gets back to the point you were talking about where you kind of have to treat these agents as just like employees in a way. Right.
Yes.
Because you're going to have to manage them, I think, in the same way, and you're definitely not going to give them full autonomy. So, in a world where like all this stuff is getting automated, and I'll let you go after this because I really appreciate your time so far today. But how should CISOs? Is that what you call it in the United States?
Yeah,
How would,
right.
because in Asia they call it like I forget how they pronounce it, but it was different. I had actually two guys on, both of who were CISOs, and they're like, "That's not how we say it," and I can't remember what the other pronunciation was. But as long as I got it right, I'm good. But how should CISOs think about measuring success in a world where these SOCs are becoming more and more autonomous? Is it like faster response times? Is it lower analyst? Like, how are they measuring success around this?
It's I think it's still the same metrics that measure the SOC, right? For example, mean time to detect, mean time to response, mean time to resolve, to mitigate, right?
Right.
All those same metrics. With I think if you that's what I like most is about before and after. So before you use autonomous SOC, what is your metrics? And after you use autonomous SOC, what is your metrics, right?
Yeah.
So you can clearly see before if you continue use the old just human only then your metrics you're not going to keep up. Keep on backlog like and now with AI, I think those metrics are still the same
Got
to
it.
measure.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah, but you also want to see if there's a change, right? If there's any delta around what you were getting before and what you're getting now, and hopefully you're getting better results now with autonomy as opposed to worse, no?
Oh, absolutely. I think now it's for larger for organizations that run their own SOC, what they should be able to achieve is better security posture.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you have people, and then for the service providers, it's better efficiency. So you can still maintain the same amount of people, but servicing more clients without having to continue adding more people, because that's a challenge for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Because of shortage. Yes.
Can I ask you one more thing before I let you go? Just because you brought it up, and I'm curious, because you operate in this space way more than I do. But when I see something like OpenClaw come out, it excites me, right? Because I just think, how can I use this from an orchestration level to do a whole bunch of things and perform a bunch of activities for me that you like you said, they're just repeatable stuff, but then I can do all these things with it that I couldn't do before. But when you and your team see OpenClaw come out and you said like, oh my God, filled with vulnerabilities, I wouldn't put anything, not like so negative on it, but like, what are the conversations like internally when you see something like OpenClaw come out? Are you just like, oh no, I hope my clients don't use this thing? Do you know what I mean? Because it's so vulnerable.
Right. I remember my first, we had friends talking about it when it first came out. People are like, this thing is so cool, so powerful. And when I look at it, I say, that's too much privilege. Yeah. So you have to, it's very, very, you basically give everything. And so I think you have to understand the security risk before you adopting those tools.
Got it.
Making sure it can only access the things that you want it to access.
Yeah. I mean, this was also a really interesting conversation that I was having with somebody too. It's like you can give an agent access only to the things that you wanted to. And I was hearing a story where people were actually trying to trick the AI agent into giving them information that they didn't necessarily, like they weren't supposed to give out. It's just really interesting. Right. Yeah, it's just really interesting. And you're right. Like you have to understand like some of the security risks around this. Okay, I won't keep you anymore. I really appreciate your time. Aimei Wei, founder, CTO at Stellar Cyber. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for doing that.
No problem. Thank you, Mike, for having me.
It's my complete pleasure, Aimei. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Okay, that's it today for AGTP Daily. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you for Aimei Wei, the CTO at Stellar Cyber, for joining us as well. Give us a thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and follow us on all of our socials, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn across the web. Let us know in the comments. Again, we want to do more AMA. We did our first shot at it today. Let us know if there's anything in the comments on any of the platforms where you can comment to us or with us that you would like us to discuss on our upcoming shows. My name is Michael Waits. Bye for now. Have a super day, and we will see you tomorrow.